Welcome to a special episode of Inside Iraq. I'm Jassim Azzawi. Before Saddam was even buried, the most important question on the mind of many was, what is next in store for Iraq politically and militarily? Saddam's hanging clears the political stage for President Bush to unveil his military strategy to stabilize Iraq. But will that strategy succeed? President Bush may send 30,000 American soldiers to stabilize Baghdad. But observers ask, can Iraq really be saved by more troops or by a political settlement? And in Iraq itself, how has the execution been received? Sami Zaidan reports.
Iraqis woke up on the first day of the Muslim holiday of Eid Adha to the news of the execution of former Iraqi President Saddam Hussein. His death came 55 days after a sentence had been handed down. Choosing such a religious holiday on which to hang Saddam raises questions about the timing of the execution. Eid al-Adha is the time when Muslims slaughter an animal in charity. While many throughout the Middle East were happy to see Saddam removed from power, they saw his trial as unfair and driven by a predetermined outcome. His execution comes after a long and rocky stint in power. Saddam moved quickly to assert his strongman image after he assumed the presidency in 1979. During 8 years of war with Iran in the 1980s, Saddam received support from many Middle Eastern countries as well as from the United States. Washington saw him as the protector of the Arab world's eastern gate from Iranian influence. The Arab nations, however, opposed Saddam when his forces occupied Kuwait in 1990. Yet Saddam won popular support among many Arabs when he attacked Tel Aviv with Scud missiles during the Gulf War in early 1991. Yet the former Iraqi leader was despised by many of his countrymen for his iron fist dictatorship. But following his arrest, he also earned admirers throughout the Arab world for his stoic performances during his televised trial sessions. Saddam was defiant right up to the last moment. Iraqi television showed images of the 69-year-old appearing calm and chatting to his hangmen as they placed the noose around his head. The US hopes the execution will close a chapter in Iraq's history, but it leaves many questions about US plans for the future unanswered. Sami Zaidan, Al Jazeera.
And to discuss the regional implications of Saddam's execution, I'm joined from Cairo by Ambassador Hassan Isa of the Egyptian Council on Foreign Relations. Ambassador, Saddam evoked different reactions over the past 35 years. What do you think his execution will play out in the Middle East?
His execution, in my opinion, will just cause more destabilization for Iraq and more violence in the Middle East that is going to cross borders from Iraq into neighboring countries. Contrary to what President Bush aimed at executing Saddam Hussein, he thought that this might win him a quick, fictitious victory. But I believe that it is causing the contrary. It is causing this uproar in the entire Middle East, whether because of the Arabs and the Muslims feel so insulted because of the timing, or appalled owing to what happened by executing Saddam Hussein. The end line is more violence and there is more destabilization.
Since Saddam was politically finished and he has no chance of whatsoever, to do what he did in the past, why his death, as you say, is going to play out perhaps violently and will have a lasting effect in the Middle East and perhaps North Africa?
Absolutely, absolutely. I will not be talking about Saddam Hussein as such. He is a controversial ruler, described by most as a dictator and described by others as savior of Iraq. But this is not our issue here. Our issue is the significance of the hanging of Saddam Hussein. We can rotate around 4 terms used by the neoconservatives in the United States in the present administration. We can rotate around the term New Middle East, Greater Middle East, constructive chaos, and birth pangs. They want, the neoconservatives, the neocons, want a new Middle East that is free, in their opinion, of terrorism. They consider that countries in the Middle East, in their present shape and formation, is a source of terrorism. And they want to destroy this formation of the countries to build a new Middle East that would be free of terror and thus, in their opinion, save the United States. New Middle East is the greater Middle East, is the new Middle East, but added to it, Iran, maybe Turkey, and maybe Pakistan. When they talk about constructive policy, they talk about this destruction process that is going on, ranging all the way from Afghanistan, through Iraq, through Lebanon, through Sudan, through Palestinian territories, this, all in all, and in Somalia, of course, all in all, this is the kind of chaos that they aim, and they call it constructive chaos as a first step in the form of building this new Middle East.
Before you proceed into the next stage, Ambassador, this American enterprise in Iraq, this colossal blunder that is costing the United States political as well as financial capital, to what extent, where many analysts say it will leave the Middle East perhaps worse off, i.e. that many people believe that the reform movement will somehow be taking a second seat?
In all these fields, especially what you mentioned, the damage done by this administration and by the neoconservatives and by President Bush, the damage done, inflicted in this area, in my opinion, is almost irreparable. Almost irreparable. That is why I say it will take years and years, maybe a decade, to rectify all the damage caused by this administration. Now, and as I was previously saying, Condoleezza Rice was here, and she was talking about birth pangs. She very enlighteningly described what's happening in the form of chaos in all these countries as birth pangs of the birth of a new Middle East. The Middle East and the Arab countries are going to see very, very disturbed and very violent days to come.
Well, she has to say that, doesn't she? But regarding Saddam Hussein, for a long time he wanted to inherit the mantle of Jamal Abdel Nasser and become a regional and Arab hero for Arab nationalism. To what extent that vestige, that period, is affecting the way he is being perceived?
Again, I do not want to talk about Saddam Hussein. Yes, this is what was in his opinion. Yes, this is what he aimed in doing. He wanted to lead the Arab world. He wanted to lead the area. That is why he had this 8-year war with Iran. But when we talk about the 8-year war in Iran, who was supporting this war? Who was supporting both Iran and Iraq? It was the United States, just as much as they supported bin Laden in Afghanistan. So yes, Saddam Hussein wanted to do this, but he got the support of the United States. So again, I say, who is to blame in this area? It is the United States that supported all this violence and is supporting and will be supporting more chaos in the area.
Ambassador, the president of the American Council on Foreign Relations, Mr. Richard Haas, in a very famous article, he says the American enterprise in Iraq will force the Americans to withdraw totally from the Middle East. But the same forces that drew the United States into the region are still there, primarily oil, security of the Gulf countries, and the security of Israel.
You are quite right, sir. All these elements are still present, and they will remain to be present. That is why, in my opinion, I do not believe what Mr. Haas has said, and he was in charge of other departments in the State Department. But Mr. Haas, in this regard, is not quite right, because the United States, in my opinion, is not going to leave Iraq. Not going to leave Iraq. One of the major aspects of the American foreign policy is that when they disarm a country, they bear the responsibility of protecting this. They did this with Japan, they did this with Germany, they're doing this with Iraq, over and above, of course, oil and, as you said, Israel, that was the main beneficiary from dismantling the Iraqi army, from dismantling Iraq completely, thus causing all this chaos.
The total bill to the United States right now is about $400 billion, and estimates are by the time this enterprise comes to completion, the bill might be $1.2 trillion. Right now, There are almost 3,000 American soldiers dead and more than 20,000 maimed. In light of what you said, and the Americans are not leaving, how do you envisage their stay? Secure bases somewhere in the desert of in Iraq?
Yes, they might redeploy. You are quite right. Their losses, whether financial or in lives, is extensive. But after what they spent, and having in mind the two goals that they have, which is first oil, second, or rather first security of Israel, and second oil, in view of that, and in view of what they spent, and in view of what they claimed, that there are weapons of mass destruction, all the false pretexts which got them into Iraq, leads me to say that they will never leave Iraq. They might redeploy outside Baghdad, outside the main cities, but leaving Iraq is no way. They will not leave Iraq. And again, we'll have a third example, like Japan and like Germany. American bases will never leave Iraq, because when they control the Iraqi oil, thus they control Middle East oil, thus they control consumers of Middle East oil, namely China, Japan, Russia, Europe, and by doing so, the American hegemony of the area and of the world will be complete.
Ambassador Hassan, President Mubarak advised President Bush before he embarked on this war not to do it, and yet he did it. In your opinion, all the reasons were given, WMDs, democracy, and a few others, they were basically a smokescreen, while the real purpose was oil, as you refer to it now?
Was oil and the security of Israel. It is obviously, take for example one aspect of what he did in Iraq, dismantling almost 600,000 soldier army. Why? There is no logic at all in doing this, except it is done for the sake of Israel, dismantling the army. My proof is that what he is doing now, he is rebuilding again the army, and he is inviting the Baathists to come and join the army again, in spite of the fact that when he dismantled the army, he dismantled it under the pretext of de-Baathification. That was nonsense, of course, because again his gathering over an army, inviting the Baathists to do so. The security of Israel and oil are his two main goals, regardless of all the false pretexts. Democracy is what he calls democracy is a farce. How can he invite democracy in Iraq and on Palestinian territories? Yet, when it is applied, he refuses democracy in Palestine, and the siege of the Palestinian people and the hunger that he is causing them, only because they applied democracy. And they know, and the Americans know, that democracy was applied on Palestinian territory. President Carter was there. I personally was there heading the Egyptian delegation. And we saw that it was a democratic, transparent process. Yet he fought it. At the same time, he wants to convince the world that he wants to apply democracy in Iraq. Illogical, absolutely refused.
At that wonderful note, Ambassador Hassan Isa, we leave it, and we thank you very much. Throughout the Middle East, the trial and conviction of Saddam Hussein has been controversial. The Iraqi government says the court process was fair and the sentence was just. Many others, though, claim the whole outcome was predetermined. Earlier, I discussed the issues with Richard Dicker, the director of the International Program of Human Rights Watch, Bassam al-Husseini, an advisor to the Iraqi Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki, and Sabah al-Mukhtar, president of Arab Lawyers Association in London.
Laws of war prohibits occupying force from setting up extraordinary courts, and this is exactly what the Americans have done. Saddam Hussein was put on trial without him or his lawyers having even the indictment sheet, which sets out the charges, the evidence, the documents, and what have you before the trial started. Saddam's trial, he was denied proper access to lawyers. 3 of his defense team were murdered. 5 others outside the team who were advisors have also been murdered. Judges have been interfered with their affairs, to the extent that even the judge that this government has appointed has resigned. The other one has been removed. It showed the total lack of impartiality and independence of this trial. This is definitely a wasted opportunity. This is nothing more than a Wild West lynching process. They've tried to set up a trial in the situation where there is a war in that country. You cannot hold proper trials in a state of war. And this is exactly what this situation in Iraq. All the others who are supporting it are referring to the, all those who are supporting this are referring to the how bad the man was. Maybe we agree on that one, but we are talking about the trial and not the man.
Bassam, this is a political trial according to Sabah al-Mukhtar. Iraqi judges were partial, as a matter of fact, and they went out of their way to put the man to death. How do you answer that charge?
I don't believe what Mr. Mukhtar is saying. He's undermined the fact of the matter. This is an Iraqi judicial process. It's very independent in their own decision. The Iraqi government did not interfere in any shape, in any form in that matter. We've gone through a very lengthy process of with this court. We started back in October 19, 2005. By the time we finished to a verdict was November 5, and had to go to an appeal chamber. Everything was totally independent. The Iraqi people are very happy to see justice being served. The first time ever, I think, from the new era of Iraq, the new Iraq, the most beneficial of the whole ordeal was Saddam Hussein, because he is the one he had to go through the new process of democracy with all the vicious acts and killing and massive graves and all these what he did to Iraq, to the Iraqi people. I think Saddam deserved the death sentences. It was very fair process. I don't believe the human rights organization, where were they when my people were being killed and slaughtered by Saddam Hussein?
You asked the question, Bassam, about the Human Rights Watch. We have somebody from the Human Rights Watch which attacked and criticized the decision, and you cited interference by the Iraqi government. Richard, was politics or law the determining factor in the outcome?
Well, first, if I may, I'll tell you exactly where Human Rights Watch was when Saddam Hussein was slaughtering innocent civilians around the country. We were doing everything that we could to document those human rights crimes, publish them, put pressure on governments to bring a halt. We were in northern Iraq in 1992 collecting information about the genocidal campaign that the Ba'ath Party government carried out against the Kurdish population in the north. I spent 2 years of my life in 1994 and 95 trying to persuade governments to bring a genocide case against Iraq for the extermination of the Kurds. So that's my track record. As to the fairness of the trial, we documented, on the basis of being in the courtroom for about 80% of the proceeding, a trial that was seriously not fair. I wouldn't use the term kangaroo court, but I would say that there were serious failures on the part of the Iraqi High Tribunal to afford to Saddam and the others what would be recognized as a fair trial. I think those shortcomings undercut the credibility and legitimacy of the process. Now, I want to go back to the point about a lost opportunity. What's lost here is the creation of an indisputable factual record that in years going forward will serve the people of Iraq as a reference point as to what happened under Ba'ath Party rule and who was responsible. I think that is a real loss.
Sabah, if you are to compare Saddam's trial with the trial of al-Dajjal, how would you compare the two?
Well, in the trial of Dajjal, there were about 300 people who were arrested at the time after there was an attempt on the life of the head of the state, regardless of what we think of him. Those people went through a process of about 2 years of investigation, trial, and obviously there was some abuse of human rights there. It was not documented. It's not in front of the eyes of the world, as is the case here. They had lawyers to defend them. Out of those people, about 150 were found to be guilty. They were sentenced to death. Under the Constitution, the head of state had to ratify it. Now, that is not a crime in itself. Now, we can, if we are assuming this is a human rights abuse, you could try the judge if you want, but the judge was doing his job. Now, he had less of a chance to defend himself than those who have died in the Dajjal trial at that time.
Let me go back to Bassam al-Husseini. Bassam, Sabah al-Mukhtar mentioned the indictment sheet. That is to say, Saddam, up to the moment when he went to trial, he did not know exactly what were charges against him.
Oh, that's a false accusation. All the documentation being submitted to the defense team prior to October 19, the first day of the trial. However, if they did not choose to read it or go through it, that's their problem. This was an Iraqi tribunal. It was run by Iraqi judges. It was not an intervention by the American or the Iraqi government, for that matter, and everything took its own course. It was a very lengthy process. I gotta mention some of the fact that, like, we see a lot of the Iraqi people are very happy to see the indictment of Saddam. I mean, we're not surprised. I just don't want to see the 99.99% are with the verdict and they support this tribunal. Unless the other minority of the people who support Saddam remnants still out there against this verdict. So I want to see where the Iraq is going. I highly suggest that Mr. Mukhtar be with the majority of the Iraqi people.
Let me put that to Sabah. Sabah, are you swimming against the current? The entire Iraqi population, it seems they are happy with the decision.
Well, if the Iraqis are looking for vengeance, or some of the Iraqis are looking for vengeance, which I understand, and there are some people who actually want vengeance from Saddam Hussein, that's fine. But let's not claim that we are going through a legal process. Iraqis have done this before in 1958, when the monarchy men were dragged in the streets. That was the raw justice, which is not different from the lynching exercise in the Wild West they do in America at the time. On the other hand, when they had the 1958 court, which was called the People's Court, which did not give the men of the monarchy a fair trial, they all became martyrs. We don't want Saddam to become the martyr of Iraq. Iraq deserves better martyrs. The Americans have now, and I disagree totally with Mr. Husseini saying that it was an Iraqi one. He knows absolutely well that it was totally and absolutely run by the Americans, both those people who were in court, outside court, with the exception of the two faces we see on the screen. He knows exactly that the whole exercise from A to Z was an American one, and it was controlled by the Americans. And even today, Saddam is in the hands of the Americans because they do not trust the system in Iraq.
Sabah, let me stop you for just a second. Bassam, he wants to say something. Go ahead, Bassam.
Well, I think this was an Iraqi tribunal, you know it. The Americans are really being supported. They support the lawyers of Saddam Hussein. They are the one who bring him back from the airport to the green zone to go through the trial. They count on the American. I'm really surprised on your what you're saying, because now the whole defense team are counting with the American to keep Saddam with the Americans. Saddam Hussein legally with the Iraqi authority for the executive branch of the government, and they will deliver execution. Hopefully we'll eyewitness this, and Saddam, this dynasty is over. Enough of genocide. We need to go forward with the process. Saddam is long gone. Do not think about him as a leader.
Well, they were trained by the Americans. All the judges were trained. The Americans are taking the credit for training the judges as if Iraq had no people who can judge. Iraq is a country which had judges that
by international communities, not by Americans.
Business.
The training they took in London was not by the American, was by international and supervised by the United Nations.
Sam, let me engage one of those Americans. Richard, to what extent this was an American, there was an American input? To what extent this was a small achievement for President Bush to see Saddam finally off life?
I think obviously the American government played a huge role in assisting the establishment of the Iraqi High Tribunal through funds, through the provision of experts from the U.S. Department of Justice, through all kinds of forensic expertise, etc. In my mind, there's no question as to the essential American role in establishing the Iraqi High Tribunal. I don't think that's as problematic as the fact that
Richard,
the Americans made a wrong decision. I think what should have been created was a court that contained Iraqi lawyers and judges and international lawyers and judges working together in a partnership. I think that would have created the possibility of a much more legitimate process.
We'll take a short break now, and when we come back, we will see whether the United States military plan needs a fresh political atmosphere in Iraq to overcome the current nightmare. Stay with us.